Let's talk about polymorphism now. So this is similar to, if you're a Harry Potter fan, the polyjuice potion, to where you mix up this potion and you take it and outwardly you look like something else. So it is where one object has more than one form it can become or use. So in programming, this allows you to write a method, and then you can write another copy of the method to handle different types, or you can write a class and have it change the way that it behaves depending upon what it's inheriting, depending upon what it actually does. So I wrote this in the documentation, but according to Microsoft, there are two different types of or two distinct aspects for polymorphism. There is runtime, so I'm going to just read this out. At runtime, objects of a derived class may be treated as objects of a base class in places such as method parameters and collections or arrays. When this polymorphism occurs, the object's declared type is no longer identical to its runtime type, which means that however you declare it, it could change throughout the execution of the program. The other is base classes may define and implement virtual methods, and derived classes can override them, which means they provide their own definition and implementation. At runtime, when client code calls the method, the CLR looks up the runtime type of the object and invokes that override of the virtual method. In your source code, you can call a method on a base class and call a derived class's version of the method to be executed. So really what that is, and what we will go through in these set of videos, is writing a method in a base class and then overriding it in a derived class to change the way that that method behaves. And depending upon how you override it and where you override it, then different derived classes can have their own implementation of that particular method. So polymorphism is really one of those things which it'll take a bit to wrap your head around, but it's basically changing what happens whenever you call it, and changing based off of different conditions. So let's go ahead and look at an example in practice. So I want to, and I'm not going to worry about classes right now, I'm just going to create a method to, say, add two numbers together. So I'm going to, well, first off, I'm going to say int num1, int num2, console write line, actually write, please enter two numbers separated by a space. And I need to have a string input string. I also need a string array split string. So this will be input string is equal to console.readLine, and split string is equal to input put string.split. And now I just need to populate each of these ints. So num1 is equal to int.parse, and this will be split string 0, and num2 is equal to int.parse split string 1. All right, so we have our two numbers that are getting read in, and now let's go ahead and create a method which will add these two together. So static, and this static method I'm going to return I'm going to return a type int add nums, and this is going to take in two numbers, n1, int, n2. And this is going to return n1 plus n2. So now here, I'm going to create one more variable, int answer, and I'm going to say answer is equal to add nums, num1, num2. So just like before, we have a very simple method which is adding those two numbers together. So we want to 4215, and oh, I'm not actually printing anything out. So console write line, string interpolation, num1 plus num2 is equal to answer. Now we'll actually get some information out. So 4215, and 42 plus 15 is equal to 57. Great. So we already wrote this before, so this shouldn't be that much dissimilar to things that you have learned already. But this works with integers. Both of these types are integers. What if instead of integers, we want to have this as a float, and a float, and a float? And in fact, we're going to have to change these to floats as well because we want to parse it as an integer, or parse them as floats as opposed to integers. This is going to complain right away. Argument type float is not assignable to parameter type int. So if you remember the casting, going from an int to a float, and actually going from a float to an int, sorry, when you have a float here and you try to put it into an int, you have to explicitly tell it that you're going to an int, because you can't just put a larger data type into a smaller storage type. Even though floats and ints are going to be the same size, going from float to int, you're losing precision. So instead of changing this, because we may have some instances where we're actually reading in ints. So we want to go ahead and just copy this, and now we'll say float, and we'll just leave both of these as float. Float and float. And so now putting those as float, notice that this is now showing one usage, and this is not showing any usage. So because we are calling this with two floats, and we are passing the floats to a method called addNums, it identifies that, hey, we should probably use this one and not this one. And so now when we run this, and we do 42.15 and 12.5, now we get a float out as an answer.